Probably again, a lot of these sentiments around Christianity is a white man's religion. It often comes from our experience and also our corporate experience in this country. But as Lisa mentioned, what really inspires and really moves a lot of my scholarship is the desire to bring people further back in history. Because the sad reality is that in this country, in this hemisphere, terrible things were done to Africans and Native Americans in the name of Christ. But what happens, I think, with this clip, the thing that I have to take extreme issue with was the part in the video where he said, well, Christianity, other religions, and that he was talking about Christianity and Islam in particular, have come into the African's life and culture through force. And yeah, that's true for Islam, most definitely, but that's not true at all for Christianity. So just real quick, I wanted to, so when we look at the transatlantic slave trade, when we go back before that into late antiquity, this is the thing that is apologetically, I think, the most helpful thing to respond when someone says something like that, is to tell them that not only did Christianity come into the continent of Africa peacefully and willfully. Not only did, in contrast to that, did Islam come into the continent of Africa in the year 640 with the sword, but most importantly, all, not just one or two, all of the ancient African kingdoms were Christian. They didn't just have Christians in them, they were Christian nations. Carthage, or Numidia, with capital at Carthage, Egypt, Nubia, and Ethiopia. These are the ancient African Christian kingdoms. So, starting in the first century, and again, like is the case in all early Christianity, the gospel spreads through the Jews, right? I mean, in Acts 2, Egyptians were there, Mesopotamians, Arabs. So these Jewish people who received the Holy Spirit went back to their land and they brought the gospel. And so it's the same thing with Egypt and also in Carthage, the earliest African Christian kingdoms. We saw Simon of Cyrene help Jesus carry the cross. So we know that there was Christians. There's early evidence. Some of the earliest martyrdom texts, the martyrdom of Perpetua and Felicity. Tertullian, one of the earliest Christian apologists, was from Carthage. And then also in Egypt, we have the earliest biblical fragment that is extant from Egypt in the mid-2nd century. From anywhere, comes from Egypt. We have the first seminary in the history of Christianity in Egypt. And also in Nubia, the gospel comes in through Egypt, debatably sometime in between the 5th and 6th century, through Egyptian missionaries going into Nubia. But it's likely that Christianity came into Nubia even before that, because the eunuch mentioned in Acts chapter 8, even though the New Testament calls him Ethiopian, was more likely a Nubian, because Ethiopios in Greek is just a kind of a stock word for saying a black person in Greek, when in actuality it says he was a eunuch of Candace, which was the titular title of the queen of Nubia, Meroe. So likely this was the first Nubian Christian in Acts 8. And so, but we have documented evidence of the Nubian king receiving Christianity. You can read Salim Faraji's book, The Roots of Nubian Christianity, to learn more about that. But already in the mid-5th century, and then even earlier than that in Ethiopia, we have Christianity no later than the mid-3rd century, when, like the king of Nubia, Silko, King Izana of Ethiopia, proclaims Christianity the state religion. And in the early 4th century, Ethiopia becomes fully Christian and also receives a missionary named Frumentius from Egypt, who brings the gospel and converts the royal and imperial household and brings Christianity to Ethiopia. And so already in the 1st, and then in the 4th, and then in the 5th century, by that time, all of this before Islam even existed, before Muhammad was even born, all of these African Christian kingdoms were, again, Christian nations. Absolutely. Which by the time around 640, after the death of Muhammad and his early followers, the Rashidun Caliphate conquers all of the Arabian Peninsula, goes into Persia, and goes into the rest of Mesopotamia. When they come into Africa, this is one of the interesting things that happens. And this goes back to the point I was trying to make about feeling a sense of cultural ownership in the gospel. People have to feel like the gospel belongs to, I'm a part of this. This is God's gospel, but I can see myself in this. If that doesn't happen, it's not going to thrive, and for the long term. And so just to give a case study real quick about how this, in the case of ancient African Christianity, you have two that survived to today, and then two that didn't, two that are extinct. And I just want to make a quick point to draw that to make that point, that the two that survived are the Coptic Orthodox Church, which is still a thriving ancient church, which is the dominant Christian church in Egypt. Christians are about 15% minority of Egypt, but the Coptic Church has been in Egypt longer than Islam has existed, and is still a strong presence in the country today. And then the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, which is still the dominant religion, period, in the country of Ethiopia. And the two that are extinct are Nubian Christianity. Nubia was a predominantly Christian kingdom starting in the 5th century, and interestingly about Nubia, Nubians were the only country that successfully fought off Muslim invaders.